My beloved child, someone is trying to rewrite a love story that was never theirs to control. Don't scroll, because if this story found you today, there may be something hidden inside it that speaks to your heart. Imagine this for a moment. Somewhere, far away from where you are now, your soulmate was standing in complete silence while someone looked directly into their eyes and said, "Forget them forever. Walk away before it's too late. They are not meant for you." The room became unbelievably quiet. Every heartbeat seemed louder than the last. No one expected what would happen next. The people standing nearby believed your soulmate would lower their head, agree without a fight, and leave your memory behind forever. They thought fear would be stronger than love. They thought pressure would erase every feeling they had carried inside for so long. But they were completely wrong. Instead of stepping back, your soulmate took a slow breath and looked at the person who had spoken those painful words. Their eyes carried something that couldn't be explained with logic alone. It wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. It was certainty. A certainty so powerful that everyone watching felt uncomfortable. Then, with a calm voice that nobody expected, your soulmate answered, "I can pretend to forget a name, but I cannot command my heart to erase someone who changed my life forever." The room froze. Those words landed with a force nobody had prepared for. Some people looked away because they suddenly realized they had underestimated the strength of a genuine connection. Others whispered to each other, wondering why someone would risk everything just to defend a person who wasn't even present. But your soulmate didn't stop there. They continued speaking with a quiet confidence that made every sentence impossible to ignore. "You can tell me to leave. You can tell me to move on. You can tell me that loving them is impossible. But you cannot decide what lives inside my soul. That choice has never belonged to anyone except me." Silence followed once again. It was the kind of silence that changes people. The kind that forces everyone in the room to question whether they had judged the situation too quickly. Deep inside, your soulmate remembered every moment that reminded them of you. The conversations they couldn't forget. The strange feeling that your paths were connected long before either of you realized it. The nights when your memory appeared without warning. The unexplained peace that arrived whenever they imagined seeing you again. Those memories refused to disappear, no matter how many people insisted they should. The person who wanted your soulmate to forget you became frustrated. They repeated themselves with even greater determination. "You are wasting your future. They will never understand you. They will never return. Forget them now." But this time, your soulmate smiled. Not because the situation was easy, but because they finally understood something important. Real feelings are never erased by commands. Genuine connections do not disappear simply because someone else is uncomfortable with them. The strongest bonds survive doubt, distance, fear, and even the opinions of those who never truly understood them. That realization changed everything. From that moment forward, your soulmate stopped fighting their own heart. Instead, they accepted that some people leave footprints on the soul that time can never wash away. Even if the entire world demanded those footprints disappear, they would remain exactly where they were, quietly, reminding them that certain connections exist for reasons bigger than anyone can explain. And although nobody in that room realized it yet, your soulmate had just made a decision that would soon set an unexpected chain of events into motion. A decision that would lead them closer to the truth they had been searching for all along. What happened next would leave everyone speechless. The very people who begged your soulmate to forget you would soon witness something they never believed could happen, and when that moment arrived, every doubt they once carried would begin to crumble before their eyes. Your soulmate left that place carrying more than a decision. They carried a quiet promise that no matter how confusing the road became, they would never betray what their heart already knew. Yet the people around them refused to give up. They believed that if enough time passed, your memory would slowly fade, like an old photograph left beneath the sun. Every day someone reminded them to move on. Every conversation ended with the same advice. Stop thinking about them. Start a new chapter. Forget what never happened. Your soulmate listened politely, but inside, something entirely different was taking place. Every attempt to erase you only made your presence feel stronger. It was as though the harder the world tried to pull your story apart, the tighter the invisible thread between you became. Then something unexpected happened. One quiet evening, while walking home alone, your soulmate noticed a familiar melody playing from a nearby cafe. It was a song that instantly reminded them of you. Their steps slowed. Memories rushed back without permission. They remembered a smile they could never fully explain, a feeling of comfort they had searched for in countless places but only found whenever thoughts of you appeared. They stood there for several minutes, unable to move, wondering why life kept placing these reminders directly in their path. At that exact moment, they whispered something no one else was meant to hear. If this connection is real, give me one sign that I shouldn't give up. The words had barely left their lips when a sudden breeze carried a single piece of paper across the sidewalk until it stopped directly at their feet. They picked it up out of curiosity. It wasn't valuable. It wasn't magical. But written across the top were simple words that struck them like lightning: some things are worth waiting for. Their heartbeat quickened. Logic told them it was only a coincidence. But their heart refused to believe that. They folded the paper carefully and placed it inside their pocket as if it were a message they had been waiting to receive for a very long time. Days turned into weeks, yet the strange moments continued. Your name, appeared unexpectedly in conversations. Places they had never visited somehow reminded them of you. Even strangers spoke words that sounded like answers to questions they had never shared with anyone. Little by little, your soulmate stopped asking whether they should forget you. Instead, they began asking why every path seemed to lead back to the same person. Meanwhile, the people who once demanded they move on became increasingly frustrated. They couldn't understand why every attempt to separate the two of you seemed to have the opposite effect. One of them finally confronted your soulmate again. Why are you still holding on? Haven't you realized this is impossible? Your soulmate looked at them with calm eyes and answered, impossible things don't continue finding me every single day. If this story was meant to end, life would have stopped reminding me of it. Those words left everyone speechless once again. For the first time, even the loudest critics had no response. Deep inside, they began wondering whether there really was something they couldn't see. Whether perhaps love wasn't always measured by distance or circumstances, but by the quiet certainty that refused to disappear. What nobody realized was that, at that very same moment, another truth was beginning to unfold. A secret that had been hidden for months was finally moving toward the surface, and when it was revealed, every person who had tried to keep your soulmate away from you would be forced to question everything they believed. The answer they had been searching for was closer than ever, and it would arrive in the most unexpected way imaginable. A few days later, everything changed in a way no one could have predicted. Your soulmate received an unexpected phone call from someone they hadn't spoken to in a long time. The voice on the other end sounded unusually serious. There's something you need to know, they said. Not everyone has been telling you the truth. Those words echoed in your soulmate's mind long after the call ended. They couldn't ignore the feeling that a hidden piece of the puzzle was finally about to reveal itself. Without wasting another moment, they agreed to meet in a quiet place where no one would interrupt the conversation. As they arrived, they noticed the person's nervous expression. It was clear they had been carrying a heavy secret for far too long. After a long silence, the truth finally came out. The people who kept telling you to forget them weren't trying to protect you, the person admitted. They were afraid of what would happen if the two of you ever found each other again. Your soulmate stared in disbelief. Afraid? Why would anyone be afraid of that? The answer came slowly. Because they saw how different you became whenever you spoke about them. You smiled more. You believed in your future again. You stopped settling for a life that made you unhappy. They knew that if you followed your heart, they would lose the influence they had over your decisions. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Suddenly, every strange conversation, every warning, every attempt to create doubt began making sense. It had never truly been about protecting your Soulmate. It had been about control. They wanted fear to win because fear is easier to manage than hope. But something inside your soulmate had already broken free from that fear. They took a deep breath and quietly said, "So all this time, they weren't fighting against my feelings. They were fighting against my courage." The person sitting across from them slowly nodded. "Exactly. And they underestimated you." Your soulmate looked toward the sky, feeling an unexpected sense of peace settle over them. Instead of anger, they felt clarity. The confusion that had clouded their heart for so long was finally disappearing. They realized that genuine feelings don't need permission from the world to exist. They only need honesty. That evening, as they walked home beneath the fading light, they made another silent promise. This time it wasn't just to remember you. It was to stop allowing other people's fears to shape their own future. Every step they took felt lighter than the one before. It was as though invisible chains had finally fallen away. Yet they had no idea that an even greater surprise was waiting just around the corner. While organizing old belongings later that night, something slipped from the pages of a forgotten notebook and landed gently on the floor. Curious, they picked it up. It was a small, handwritten note they didn't remember keeping. The words were simple, but they struck their heart with incredible force. Some people enter your life for a reason that time can never erase. Your soulmate closed their eyes and smiled. It felt as though life itself was confirming everything they had refused to abandon. They carefully folded the note and placed it in their pocket, knowing they would carry it wherever they went. At that very same moment, miles away, a decision was quietly being made that neither of you knew about yet. Someone who had once encouraged your soulmate to forget you was beginning to regret everything they had said. Their conscience was becoming impossible to silence, and they were preparing to reveal one final truth, a truth that could change the course of this entire story forever. The person who had carried that secret for so long could no longer live with the weight of their silence. Every night, they replayed the same memory in their mind, the day they looked into your soulmate's eyes and told them to let you go forever. At the time, they believed they were doing the right thing. They convinced themselves that separating two hearts would prevent future pain. But as the weeks passed, they witnessed something they never expected. Instead of forgetting you, your soulmate became stronger. Instead of growing cold, their heart became even more compassionate. Instead of losing hope, they found a quiet confidence that no criticism could destroy. That was the moment guilt began to grow inside them. One evening they finally made a decision. They picked up their phone, stared at the screen for several long minutes, and sent a message asking your soulmate to meet one last time. The words were short but urgent. "Please come. There is something I should have told you from the beginning." Your soulmate arrived. With no anger in their heart, only curiosity. As they sat down, they noticed tears forming in the other person's eyes before a single word was spoken. After a long silence, the confession finally came. "I owe you an apology. I wasn't honest with you." Your soulmate remained calm. "Tell me the truth." The person took a deep breath and said, "The day I told you to forget them forever. Those weren't my own words. Someone else asked me to say them. They believed that if I convinced you to walk away, everything would become easier for everyone else." Your soulmate felt a wave of emotion pass through them, but they stayed silent, allowing every word to settle. "I agreed because I thought I was protecting you," the person continued. "But I was wrong. I watched you suffer in silence. I watched you pretend to move forward while your heart remained somewhere else. And every day since then, I have regretted helping create that pain." The room became completely still. Your soulmate closed their eyes for a moment, then quietly asked, "Who wanted us apart so badly?" The answer came with hesitation. "Someone who feared what your future together might become. They believed that if the two of you stayed connected, everything they had planned would fall apart." Those words changed everything. It was never about whether your connection was real. It was about the fear that real love often awakens in people who are comfortable with control. Your soulmate slowly stood up, not with anger, but with peace. "Thank you for finally telling me the truth," they said. "Because now I know something I didn't know before. Love that survives deception becomes stronger than love that never faced a challenge." The person looked down, overwhelmed with relief. For the first time in months, the burden they had carried began to disappear. As your soulmate walked away, they noticed something remarkable. The sky, which had been covered with dark clouds all afternoon, suddenly opened just enough for a single beam of golden sunlight to break through. They smiled softly, not because they believed every problem had disappeared, but because hope had returned in a way no one could take away. They had stopped asking whether they should forget you. Now they only wondered when your paths would cross again. But unknown to them, another conversation was already taking place. The very people who once believed they had ended your story together were beginning to panic. They had just learned that your soulmate knew the truth, and they realized something terrifying. No lie, no matter how carefully planned, can survive forever once the truth begins to speak. What they decided to do next would become the most shocking chapter of this entire journey. The news spread faster than anyone expected. The people who had spent so much time trying to convince your soulmate to leave the past behind suddenly realized they were losing control of the story they had carefully created. Every excuse they had used was beginning to fall apart. Every false assumption was being questioned. Every whispered conversation that once seemed convincing now sounded empty. For the first time, they understood that truth has a quiet power. It doesn't need to shout. It simply waits for the right moment to be revealed. Your soulmate felt that change immediately. The strange pressure that had followed them for so long began to disappear. Their heart no longer carried confusion. It carried direction. They stopped wondering whether they had imagined the connection. They stopped questioning every memory. Instead, they embraced the simple fact that some people leave a mark on your soul that no distance, no opinion, and no amount of time can erase. One morning, while walking through a familiar street, your soulmate unexpectedly overheard two strangers having a conversation. One of them smiled and said, "If something is truly meant for you, no one else's decision can keep it away forever." Your soulmate froze for just a second. They weren't looking for signs anymore, yet life continued placing them gently along the path. They smiled to themselves and whispered, "Maybe I've been walking toward the answer all along." At the very same time, the person who had first encouraged everyone to separate the two of you was sitting alone, unable to escape the weight of regret. They remembered every harsh word they had spoken, every warning they had given, every attempt to convince your soulmate that forgetting you was the only option. But now those memories no longer brought confidence. They brought guilt. Deep inside, they realized something they had never admitted before. They had underestimated the strength of genuine love. They believed feelings could be controlled like instructions written on paper. They were wrong. The heart doesn't obey fear forever. Sooner or later, it always searches for the truth. Unable to carry the burden any longer, they made one final decision. They gathered everyone who had been involved from the beginning and quietly said, "We have to stop this. We've already caused enough pain." The room fell silent. Some looked surprised. Others looked ashamed. No one argued, because deep down they all knew those words were true. One by one, they admitted they had judged the situation without understanding it. They had listened to assumptions instead of reality. They had allowed doubt to become louder than honesty. Meanwhile, your soulmate was completely unaware of this meeting. They were simply living each day with renewed hope, believing that whatever was meant to happen would happen at the right time. Then, just before sunset, their phone vibrated. It wasn't a long message. It contained only one sentence, but that single sentence made their heart race. "Everything you were told was a lie. And it's finally time for the truth." They read it again and again, hardly believing their eyes. A strange feeling settled over them, not fear, but anticipation. It felt as though every unanswered question was finally leading to one unforgettable moment. They looked toward the horizon as the last light of the day filled the sky with gold, and for the first time in a very long while, they felt completely certain that the story wasn't ending. It was only beginning. And somewhere beyond everything either of you could see, a meeting that once seemed impossible was quietly moving closer with every passing day. Neither you nor your soulmate knew the exact hour, the exact place, or the exact moment, but destiny had already begun arranging the pieces. The people who once said, "Forget them forever," were now waiting to witness something they never believed could happen, a reunion powerful enough to prove that some connections cannot be erased, because they were never written only in memory, they were written deep within the heart. As the days passed, an unusual calm settled over your soulmate's life. The endless voices telling them to move on had grown quiet, replaced by something much stronger, the confidence that they had finally chosen honesty over fear. They no longer felt the need to explain themselves to anyone. They had learned that the people who truly understand your heart never ask you to silence it. One crisp morning, while watching the sunrise, your soulmate realized they could no longer carry the weight of waiting without taking a single step forward. They whispered to themselves, "If this connection is real, then I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering what could have been." It wasn't a dramatic declaration. It was a peaceful decision, the kind that changes a person's future without anyone noticing at first. From that moment on, they became open to whatever life had prepared. They stopped resisting the memories, stopped hiding the hope, and stopped pretending that your story had already ended. Instead, they welcomed every new day with quiet expectation. Meanwhile, the people who had once stood against your connection watched from a distance. They saw something impossible to deny. Your soulmate wasn't trapped by the past. They weren't obsessed or lost. They had simply become more genuine, more patient, and more fearless than ever before. One of them finally admitted, "Maybe we misunderstood what love really looks like. We thought it was something people could simply choose to erase. But real love doesn't disappear because someone else tells it to." Those words spread through the group like a confession no one had wanted to make. The walls they had built out of doubt began to crumble completely. One by one, they accepted that they had been wrong. Not because everything in life always works out perfectly, but because they had tried to control a story that never belonged to them. Then, late one evening, your soulmate opened an old journal they hadn't touched in months. Between its pages they found a single blank space beneath a sentence they had written long ago, "If we are ever meant to meet again, I hope I have the courage to recognize the moment." They smiled gently, picked up a pen, and added one final line beneath it. "Now I know that courage was never the problem. Believing in my own heart was." As they closed the journal, a deep sense of peace filled the room. They no longer needed constant signs or endless reassurance. They had discovered something far more valuable: trust. Trust that whatever was truly meant for them would arrive in its own time. Trust that no rumor, no fear, and no outside opinion could permanently separate two people if life still had unfinished chapters waiting for them. Somewhere beyond what either of you could see, the future continued moving quietly into place. New opportunities were unfolding. Old misunderstandings were fading. The people who once tried to write the ending had stepped aside, leaving the rest of the story to unfold naturally. And perhaps the greatest surprise of all was this: the answer that shocked everyone was never just the words your soulmate spoke when they refused to forget you. The real answer was everything they chose afterward. They chose honesty instead of pretending. They chose hope instead of fear. They chose peace instead of bitterness. They chose to let love remain kind, even after disappointment. That choice became stronger than every voice that had ever told them to walk away. Whether two paths meet again or continue in different directions, no one can erase the lessons, courage, and growth that genuine love inspires. And that is where this story gently comes to an end, not with certainty about the future, but with the reminder that the strongest hearts are not the ones that never face doubt. They are the ones that continue to choose truth, compassion, and hope when doubt has finally fallen silent. The rest of the story belongs to tomorrow. Months passed, yet the memory of that single sentence, "Forget them forever," had completely lost its power. It no longer sounded like an ending. It had become the beginning of the greatest lesson your soulmate would ever learn. They discovered that when people try to bury something real, the truth has a remarkable way of rising back to the surface. Every challenge had transformed them into someone stronger, calmer, and wiser. They no longer chased answers with desperation. They simply lived with quiet faith that whatever belonged in their life would never require fear to survive. Then, on an ordinary afternoon that seemed no different from any other, something extraordinary happened. A familiar name appeared in a conversation they were never supposed to hear. Your soulmate stopped walking. Their heartbeat quickened as they listened carefully. The strangers weren't speaking loudly, yet one sentence reached them with perfect clarity. Sometimes two people spend years apart only because life is preparing them to meet again at the right time. Those words lingered in the air long after the voices faded away. Your soulmate smiled without even realizing it. They didn't take it as proof or certainty. They simply accepted it as a reminder that hope is never wasted on a sincere heart. That evening they stood beneath a sky filled with countless stars and whispered softly, "Wherever you are, I hope you're finding peace. I hope you're smiling. And if our paths are ever meant to cross again, I won't let fear speak louder than my heart." At that exact moment, miles away, someone who had once encouraged everyone to keep the two of you apart quietly admitted the final truth. "We were wrong," they said. "We thought we could decide someone else's future, but all we really did was delay what the heart had already chosen." No one argued. No one defended the past. The silence in that room was different now. It wasn't filled with pride. It was filled with understanding. They had finally realized that love cannot be managed like a plan or erased like words written on sand. It grows in places where honesty is protected, and it survives even when misunderstood. As the seasons continued to change, your soulmate carried no bitterness toward those who had doubted them. Forgiveness had replaced resentment. They understood that holding on to anger would only keep them trapped in yesterday. So they let it go. They chose peace. They chose gratitude for every lesson, every challenge, and every unexpected turn that had shaped who they had become. Looking back, they realized something beautiful. If no one had ever told them to forget you forever, they might never have discovered how deeply they cared. The obstacle itself had revealed the strength of their feelings. What once seemed like the end had become the reason they finally trusted their own heart. And so this story closes with a quiet reminder. Life often places impossible moments in front of us, not to destroy hope, but to reveal its true strength. Some people will tell you to give up. Some will insist that certain chapters are already over. But only time can reveal which stories are truly finished and which are still waiting for their next page. If this story touched your heart, remember that it is a work of fiction created to inspire hope, reflection, and emotional connection. Sometimes the most powerful answers are not found in the opinions of others, but in the courage to remain true to yourself. And somewhere beyond today's horizon, another sunrise is already preparing to write the next chapter of a story that only time can tell. Long after everything had settled, your soulmate often found themselves thinking about the journey that had changed them forever. They no longer remembered the voices that said, "Forget them," with pain. Instead, they remembered them as proof that the strongest love is not measured by how easy the path is, but by how faithfully the heart holds on to what is true. One quiet evening, while sitting alone beneath a sky painted with the colors of sunset, they realized something that brought tears to their eyes. Every delay had taught them patience. Every disappointment had taught them resilience. Every moment of uncertainty had taught them to trust themselves instead of the fears of others. They smiled softly, knowing they had become a completely different person than the one who had first been told to walk away. Then their phone buzzed one final time. It wasn't from someone trying to change their mind. It wasn't another warning. It wasn't another voice filled with doubt. It was a simple message from someone who had witnessed everything from the beginning. The message read, "I watched you choose kindness when people expected anger. I watched you choose hope when everyone else chose fear. That is why you never truly lost." Your soulmate read those words again and quietly closed their eyes. For the first time in a very long while, they felt no need to prove anything to anyone. The battle had never been about convincing the world. It had been about remaining honest with themselves. Somewhere in that peaceful moment, they understood the greatest truth of all. Love is not proven by dramatic speeches or impossible promises. It is revealed by the quiet choices a person makes every single day. The choice to remain compassionate after being misunderstood. The choice to forgive after being hurt. The choice to believe in goodness even after disappointment. Those choices had shaped the person they had become. Looking toward the horizon, they whispered one final sentence into the evening breeze. Whatever tomorrow brings, I will never regret choosing a heart that stayed true. The wind carried those words into the silence as if the world itself had been waiting to hear them. And somewhere beyond what either of you could see, life continued unfolding exactly as it always does, one unexpected chapter at a time. Some stories end with a goodbye. Others end with a beginning disguised as an ending. But the most meaningful stories leave behind something far greater than certainty. They leave behind hope. Hope that encourages people to become kinder. Hope that reminds us that honesty is never wasted. Hope that inspires us to keep moving forward even when the road seems uncertain. Perhaps that was the answer that shocked everyone all along. It wasn't that your soulmate refused to forget you. It was that, despite every voice telling them to become bitter, they chose to remain gentle. Despite every attempt to fill them with fear, they chose courage. Despite every reason to stop believing in meaningful connections, they chose faith in what was good and true. That decision became the quiet victory no one expected. And as this fictional journey comes to its final page, remember this: every ending carries the possibility of a new beginning, every challenge carries the chance to grow, and every heart has the power to choose love, kindness, and hope over fear. Thank you for staying until the very end of this story. If it made you reflect, dream, or smile even for a moment, carry that feeling with you into tomorrow, because sometimes the greatest journeys begin with a single decision, not to give up on what makes your heart sincere, but to become the best version of yourself, no matter what the world says. The story may be over, but the hope it leaves behind can continue long after the final word.